Earth's a sinking ship, and you're stuck on it. Fed up, tired, and broke. Why stay in a decaying world when you can have a fresh start? Picture this: a new mansion on an alien planet, a chance to start over, and not just any welcome. Two stunning alien beauties waiting to make it unforgettable. One choice, one signature, and your entire life flips in an instant. Why wait to live the dream when the stars are calling? Hit that subscribe button and smash. Jackson Reeve slouched in his chair, the rusty springs creaking under him like a tired old friend. His tiny Miami apartment felt like a tomb, the air thick with the sour sting of salt and decay drifting through the cracked window. The seawalls had failed years ago, letting the ocean chew up half the city, and now everything smelled of ruin. Wet metal, rotting wood, a place left to die. At 36, he felt more worn out than the towers outside, their jagged frames rusting under a sky heavy with gray smog. The termination notice still echoed in his head, even though he'd dismissed it minutes ago. Employee 4729, fired, neural noncompliance. 8 years at Cyberpulse, building digital walls to protect the rich from the mess outside, and they'd kicked him out because he wouldn't plug into their endless VR shifts. His bank account was empty. His ex-wife Clara still sent holocalls demanding money he didn't have, and all he owned was a drooping orchid in a chipped pot, its purple petals sagging like a quiet surrender. He rubbed his face, stubble rough, against his hands, and glared at the plant. "You're holding up better than me," he muttered, voice scratchy from days of silence. The orchid stayed quiet, a witness to a life that had already judged him guilty. The air purifier in the corner sputtered, barely pushing back the haze that made every breath taste like dust. Outside, a siren whined faintly. Another flood alert, another scramble for dry ground. Jackson didn't budge. Why bother? He was sinking too, just in slow motion, trapped in a 300-square-foot box that used to be prime real estate before the water claimed it. A sharp ping cut through his thoughts, a jolt from the neural implant he couldn't afford to rip out. He flinched, expecting Clara's voice or another bill. Instead, a hologram flickered in front of him, a silver ship gliding through a sea of stars, its sleek lines shining like something alive. A voice followed, smooth and warm, wrapping around him like a whisper in the dark. "Earth's done. Leave it behind. Take a throne on Zelara Prime. 2 alien beauties waiting for you. Starlight living. Your escape, your chance." The ship faded into a planet. Purple hills stretching under twin suns, air so clear it sparkled. And then them. 2 figures, tall and smooth, skin glowing like wet silk, one dark as midnight, the other bright as sunrise. Their eyes seemed to find him, teasing, pulling. The slogan pulsed, "Starlight living, your body, your soul, reborn." Jackson let out a short, dry laugh. "Right. Alien women and a palace? Sounds like a trick for desperate idiots like me." But his hand hovered over the dismiss button, stuck. The voice looped again, softer, sliding into his mind like a hand brushing his neck. "Leave it behind." He glanced at the orchid, the peeling walls, the life that had drained him dry. His chest tightened, not just with hopelessness, but a restless heat stirring low in his belly. 2 women, alien or not, offering a new start? He hadn't felt anything close to desire since Clara left 3 years ago, her parting shot still sharp. "You're not enough?" The ad's final line flashed. "The rusty anchor tonight. First taste is free." He stood, the chair groaning as he moved, and grabbed his jacket, a worn leather thing that smelled faintly of damp. "Why not?" he said to the empty room, voice rough with a mix of defiance and curiosity. "What's one drink gonna change?" The orchid watched him leave, its silence heavy. The rusty anchor sat on the edge of what used to be Miami's party district, a neon-lit hole surrounded by flooded streets and empty storefronts. Its sign flickered, half-dead, but the door swung open, letting out the sharp smell of synth whiskey and the low hum of tired voices. Jackson stepped inside, the air hitting him like a damp slap, sweat, booze, and the faint crackle of static from old screens. Every wall played the same ad he'd seen at home. Zelara Prime's purple plains, settlers smiling like they'd forgotten what pain was, and those two women, dark and light, moving like they were made of liquid light. He paused, staring. Their shapes curved in ways that made his throat tight, their smiles hinting at things he wanted to know. He dropped onto a stool at the bar, the torn vinyl sticking to his jeans. The bartender, a rough-looking man with a cyber eye that clicked as it focused, slid a glass of amber liquid his way without a word. "Starlight's paying tonight," he grunted, tapping a logo carved into the glass. Jackson raised an eyebrow, but took it, the whiskey sliding down with a real, clean burn, not the cheap stuff he'd been living on. It settled warm in his chest, waking up parts of him he'd thought were dead. A woman beside him, thin and pale, her skin dull from breathing bad air, lifted her glass. "To Earth's last gasp," she croaked, her voice scratched and bitter. She smirked as she drank, but her eyes were empty. On Jackson's other side, an older man with a glowing implant in his temple grumbled, "They bumped my VR hours to 40 a week. Say it's to save the planet. Nah, it's to shove ads in my brain." He tapped the implant, wincing as it blinked. The bar felt like a graveyard, every person marked with the same story. Stuck, worn out, finished. Jackson took another sip, the whiskey easing the ache in his gut, but not the one in his mind. Then a shadow moved in, too smooth, too sharp for this place. He turned, and there was Elliot Voss, looking like he'd walked out of a dream. His suit shimmered, a faint silver glow running through it, and his smile was all teeth, bright and dangerous. "Jackson Reeve," he said, rolling the name like he owned it. "I've had my eye on you." He sat without waiting, close enough that Jackson caught a hint of something rich, leather, spice, control. "Elliot Voss, Starlight Living. You're a fit, my friend. Smart, free, ready for more." Jackson leaned back, smirking. "On me? What? You spy on my sorry life." But Voss didn't blink, just held that smile, eyes shining like he knew a secret. "Public data," he said, waving a hand. "Your work files, your searches, off-grid spots, clean air hacks, ways to vanish. You're a man who's done with this dump. Zelara Prime's your way out." He pulled a tablet from his jacket, thin and gleaming, and tapped it. A contract glowed to life, words scrolling in blue. "No cost. We take you there, set you up, a house, a fresh start, and those women you've been staring at." His gaze flicked to the screen behind the bar, where the dark-skinned alien traced a slow hand down her side, her eyes locked on the camera. Jackson's mouth went dry, the whiskey not enough to cool the heat creeping up his spine. "What's the trick?" he asked, voice rougher than he planned. Voss leaned in, his breath warm against Jackson's ear. "No trick, just a trade. The Zelarans pay for it. They want human energy. You bring that, they give you everything." The word energy lingered, thick with something Jackson couldn't pin down, but it hit him low, stirring him in ways he hadn't felt in years. He shifted, jeans feeling tight, and Voss saw it, his smile twitching. "Sounds too good," Jackson said, but came out weak. He finished his glass, the burn sharpening his edges. The bar closed in, grumbled complaints, the clink of glasses, the weight of a world that didn't care. Voss slid the tablet closer, a stylus appearing in his polished hand. "One signature, Jackson. You're gone by morning. New planet, new life, new possibilities." The last word was quiet, a pull he couldn't shake. Jackson stared at the screen, the contract a mess of small print he didn't bother with. His mind jumped to Clara, her icy glare, her empty touch. Then to the ad, those women moving like they could warm him from the inside out. He snatched the stylus, its chill biting his fingers. "Fine," he muttered, scratching his name across the screen. The signature flashed bright, then sank into the tablet like it was sealed in stone. Voss's smile widened, a hunter's look. "Welcome to the stars, Reeve," he said, tucking the tablet away. "Pods at your place, 5 a.m. pack light. Everything's waiting." He stood, suit catching the light as he slipped into the crowd, leaving Jackson with an empty glass and a heartbeat he couldn't slow. Back at the apartment, the whiskey haze wrapped around him like a heavy coat. He kicked the door shut, boots thudding to the floor, and dug a duffel bag from under the bed. What did you take to an alien world? A few shirts, jeans, a faded photo of his old dog Max he hadn't touched in years. The orchid stared as he packed, and he stopped, pouring water into its pot from a chipped mug. "Hang in there," he said, half a wish, half a grunt. He fell onto the mattress, springs jabbing his back, and shut his eyes. Sleep came fast, thick with dreams of dark hands brushing his chest, pink lips murmuring his name, a house that pulsed around him. A hiss jerked him awake, sharp, metallic, like air escaping a seal. His eyes flew open, head throbbing, and he saw it. A pod, silver and smooth, floating outside his window. The clock glowed 4:58 a.m. "No way," he rasped, lurching up, duffel in hand. The pod's hatch opened, a ramp sliding to the sill, and he stumbled in, pulse racing. The inside was glass and light, a narrow seat catching him as straps coiled over his chest. "Settler Reeve," a bright AI voice sang. "Departure in 10 seconds. Relax, your new life's starting." "Wait," he tried, but the hatch snapped shut and the pod shot upward. His gut twisted as Miami shrank below, flooded streets, broken towers, a gray blur fading fast. Stars burst into view, racing past the glass, and Earth turned into a small blue speck, then vanished. "Let me out," he shouted, fists banging the walls, but the AI chuckled. "Arrival in 14 hours. Enjoy the trip. Zelara Prime's waiting." Jackson slumped back, breathing hard, the straps pressing tight. Fear gripped him, but under it, something else simmered, wild, warm, alive. He'd signed up for this, half drunk and half desperate, and now the stars had him. The pod hummed, a steady beat matching the thrum in his veins, and he closed his eyes, letting the rush of escape. The pod hit the ground with a jolt that shook Jackson Reeve from a restless doze, his body jerking against the straps as the world snapped back into focus. His eyes flew open, breath stuck in his throat, the glass dome above him streaked with faint purple light from outside. For a second, it didn't move, just sat there, heart hammering like it wanted to burst out of his chest, the hum of the pod vibrating through his bones. Arrival complete. The AI's bright voice rang out, cutting through the quiet. "Welcome to Zelara Prime, Settler Reeve. Local conditions, optimal. Temperature, 74 degrees. Enjoy your new home." The hatch hissed open, and a wave of air rushed in, sweet and warm, carrying a smell like fresh flowers mixed with rain, so sharp and clean it burned his lungs after years of Miami sour rot. He fumbled with the straps, hands clumsy from hours pinned down, and climbed out, legs wobbling as his boots sank into soft ground. The duffel bag slid off his shoulder, thumping into violet grass that shimmered under twin suns hanging low in a sky painted with streaks of gold and orange. He straightened, blinking against the light, and froze. Ahead stood a house, but it wasn't a house, not really. Its walls were smooth and pale, like polished ivory or wet skin, shifting faintly as if it were breathing. Windows curved like sleepy eyes, catching the amber glow of the suns, and the whole structure pulsed once, a slow ripple running from base to roof. "Your residence adapts to you," the AI chirped from the pod, its voice fading as the machine began to collapse, panels folding, clicking, shrinking, until it was just a small silver cube. With a soft whoosh, it shot into the sky, disappearing into the haze, leaving Jackson alone with the thing in front of him. He dropped his bag again, staring. "Adapts," he muttered, voice rough and dry from too long without water. He took a step closer, the grass crunching under his boots, releasing a faint, sugary scent that tickled his nose. The house pulsed again, a steady beat he could almost feel in his chest, and he stopped, half expecting it to move toward him. It didn't. It just sat there, glowing softly, watching him with those strange window eyes. His stomach twisted, not just nerves, but something else, a pull deep in his gut like a thread tugging him forward. He shook his head, trying to clear it, then picked up his bag and walked toward the front, or where a front should be. As his hand reached out, the wall split open, peeling back like an eyelid, smooth and silent, revealing a warm, sunlit space inside. He stepped over the threshold, boots sinking into a floor that felt alive, soft and warm, like moss or skin under his weight. The air inside was cooler, laced with that floral scent, but thicker now, richer, wrapping around him like a blanket. The room stretched wide, walls gleaming like polished wood but shifting with faint swirls of color. Furniture curved and smooth, too perfect to be anything from Earth. In the center sat a table, simple but solid, holding a steaming pot of coffee. Real coffee, its dark, bitter smell hitting him like a punch of memory from better days. He let his bag fall, mouth watering despite himself. But before he could take a step, two shapes emerged from a hallway's shadows, and his breath caught in his throat. The taller one moved first, her steps slow and graceful, like water sliding over rocks. Her skin was dark as night, slick and shining with a sheen that danced with hints of blue and green under the light. Her eyes were black, deep and endless, pulling him in like a void, and her hair, or what passed for hair, moved like thin tendrils, swaying gently though the air was still. "Settler Jackson Reeve," she said, her voice low and smooth, humming through his chest like a deep note he could feel in his bones. "I'm Vera, your integration specialist." She held a small device, its blue light sweeping over him from his boots to his head. Her long fingers brushed his arm as she adjusted it, sharp nails grazing his skin through his jacket, sending a shiver racing up his spine. "Vitals steady," she said, her eyes narrowing just a touch. "Emotional output high. Curious." He opened his mouth to reply, but the second one cut in, bounding forward with an energy that broke the stillness. She was shorter, her skin a swirl of pinks and golds, almost translucent, like light caught in glass, glowing faintly from within. Her eyes flickered, green one second, gold the next, watching him with a spark that made his pulse jump. "Don't let Vera spook you," she said, her voice bright and warm, curling around him like a melody he couldn't shake. "She's all serious. I'm OYSS, and I chose you, Jackson." She grabbed his hand without warning, her touch soft and hot, her thumb tracing a slow circle over his wrist. "You've got something alive in you." Her chest pressed against his arm as she leaned closer, her tunic clinging to curves that made his throat tighten, and the room seemed to stretch, walls pulling outward, ceiling lifting, like it was waking up to her presence. Jackson yanked his hand back, stepping away, though his skin still tingled where she'd touched him. "Shuzma? What's that supposed to mean?" His voice came out gruffer than he intended, rough with the dryness in his mouth. LYSS smiled, her teeth sharp and bright, and tilted her head, letting her hair, short and wild, fall across one eye. "I saw your mind," she said, stepping closer again, her hip brushing his as she moved past him. "Your dreams, your struggles. You're not like the ones who just fade away. I knew you'd belong here." The lights in the room flared, a warm gold washing over them, and the air felt heavier, charged. Vera watched, her face still, but her eyes locked on him, unblinking. "Belonging is irrelevant," she said, her voice cool, but carrying a weight he couldn't ignore. "Adaptation matters. Follow me." They led him deeper into the house, and every step felt like sinking into something alive. LYSS stayed close, her shoulder grazing his as she showed him a kitchen, stocked with that coffee, fruits he'd never seen, their colors bright and strange, smells that hit him like a promise of something better. "Real food," she said, picking up a purple fruit, its skin glossy and smooth. She pressed it to her lips, biting down, and a drop of juice slid down her chin, catching the light. She wiped it with her finger, then held it out to him, her eyes daring him to take it. He didn't, but his chest tightened, and the counter stretched longer, its edge curling up like it wanted to lean in too. Vera stayed a step behind, her presence quieter but impossible to ignore. When she brushed past him in a narrow hallway, her thigh pressed against his, firm and warm through her tight suit, and the walls glowed where they touched, a soft pulse, like a heartbeat matching his own. The bedroom was the last stop, a wide space with no bed, just a rest membrane, smooth and glossy, pulsing faintly like it was alive and waiting. Way better than Earth's junk, LYSS said, flopping onto it, her body sinking into the surface, tunic riding up to show a glimpse of pink skin along her thigh. She patted the spot beside her, grinning wide. Come on, try it. Jackson hesitated, his jeans feeling snug again, and Vera's voice cut through. It molds to your needs. Rest is essential. Her eyes slid over him, lingering on his chest for a moment, and her scent hit him, sharp and wild, like storm air mixed with spice, stirring a heat low in his belly. He stepped closer, sitting on the edge, and the membrane shifted, warm and soft, wrapping around him like a hand that knew him too well. What's the deal with this place? He asked, keeping his voice steady though his neck felt warm. It's moving, reacting to everything. LYSS rolled closer, her arm brushing his, her breath hot on his shoulder. It's alive, she said, dropping her voice to a whisper that tickled his ear. It feels you, everything you feel. Her fingers trailed down his sleeve, light but firm, and the lights dimmed, then flared brighter. Vera stepped forward, her shadow stretching over them. It feeds on your emotions, she said, her tone flat but her eyes sharp, cutting through him. The stronger they are, the better it thrives. Her hand hovered near his shoulder, not touching, but close enough he felt the air shift and the walls. Jackson stood, breaking away from the membrane and their closeness, though his skin still buzzed where LYSS's fingers had been. Feeds? So I'm just fuel for this thing. His voice held steady, but his pulse didn't, racing with a mix of unease and something hotter he couldn't shake. LYSS laughed, light and easy, sitting up on the membrane as her tunic slipped higher, showing more of her thigh, smooth, glowing faintly in the dim light. Not like that, she said, her tone teasing but her eyes serious. It's a trade. We give you this place, and it takes what you're willing to share. She stretched, arms lifting, tunic pulling tight across her chest, and the room hummed, a low vibration he felt in his boots. Vera nodded, her neck arching slightly, tendrils swaying like they had a mind of their own. Survival here depends on balance, she said, her voice cool but carrying a depth that hooked him. You'll learn how it works. She turned, heading for the hallway, but her scent lingered, sharp and alive, pulling at him like a thread he didn't want to follow but couldn't cut. LYSS hopped off the membrane, her hip bumping his again as she passed, her touch light but deliberate. Rest up, Jackson, she said over her shoulder, her smile sharp. Tomorrow's when it gets good. The door closed behind them, or rather, the wall sealed itself, smooth and quiet. And he was alone, the house settling into a stillness that didn't feel still at all. He didn't sleep much that night. The membrane cradled him, warm and soft, molding to every shift of his body like it knew him better than he knew himself. But his mind wouldn't quiet. The house was too alive. Every creak, every flicker of light felt like it was watching him, waiting for something. He rolled off the bed, bare feet sinking into the floor, warm and slightly tacky, and wandered the halls. The walls glowed faintly where he passed, a soft hum trailing him like a shadow that wouldn't let go. He stopped in the living area, staring at a stretch of wall that didn't fit, smoother than the rest, with a brass handle jutting out, old and solid in a way that clashed with the house's strange, organic curves. His hand hovered over it, common sense yelling at him to leave it alone. But Jackson had never been good at listening to that voice. Curiosity always won, the same itch that had gotten him into trouble back on Earth, poking at systems he wasn't supposed to touch. He grabbed the handle, the metal cold and heavy, and turned it. A click echoed, loud in the silence, and the wall parted, peeling back to reveal a narrow staircase spiraling down into darkness. This wasn't here earlier, he whispered, his breath catching. He should have gone back, should have climbed into that membrane and pretended he hadn't seen it. But that pull, that restless spark, pushed him forward, and he stepped down. The stairs bent under his weight, soft and creaky, like wood that wasn't quite wood. The air grew cooler as he descended, damp with a faint, metallic tang that clung to his throat. At the bottom, a blue glow pulsed, steady and faint, spilling from a console sunk into a wall that looked too alive. Warm, slick, faintly veined like skin stretched over muscle. He stepped closer, the light brightening as he approached, and words scrolled across the screen in a jagged script that shifted into English before his eyes. Settler 38. Emotional drain complete. How stable. Replacement protocol active. His stomach dropped, a cold sweat breaking out on his neck. He touched the screen, fingers trembling, and more lines flickered up. Settler 37. Overload detected. How satisfied for 22 cycles. The list stretched on. Names, numbers, fates blurring together. Until the last one stopped him cold. Settler 39. Jackson Reeve. Adaptation in progress. His hand jerked back, the wall pulsing faster, like it knew he'd seen it. Knew he understood. Fuel. That's what he was. Not a tenant, not a settler, but something to be used up and replaced. His chest tightened, breath coming short, and the blue glow seemed to press in, heavy and alive. Footsteps broke the silence. Light and quick, then slower, firmer. He spun around, and there they were, Vera and LYSS, standing at the base of the stairs, their shapes sharp against the flickering light. LYSS tilted her head, her smile small but not warm, her eyes glinting like she'd caught him at something. "Curious little human," she said, stepping closer, her tunic brushing his chest as she stopped, her breath warm on his jaw. "You like digging, don't you?" Her hand slid up his arm, fingers curling around his bicep, firm and hot, sending a shiver through him despite the dread clawing his gut. Vera stayed back, her tendrils swaying faster, her voice slicing through the air. "You weren't supposed to see this yet," she said, her tone even but her eyes locked on him. "Changes nothing." Jackson snapped, pulling away from LYSS's grip, though his skin still burned where she'd touched him. "What happened to them? What's it doing to me?" His voice held steady, but his heart didn't, pounding with a mix of fear and anger. LYSS's hand dropped, but she didn't back off, her hip brushing his again as she circled him, slow and deliberate. "They didn't keep up," she said, her voice soft but carrying an edge. "The house needs your spark, your heat, your life. We help you share it." The air thickened, her closeness stirring him even as his mind screamed to run, and the blue glow pulsed in time with his ragged breaths. Vera stepped forward, her shadow stretching long, her presence a weight that pinned him in place. "Resist, and it takes more," she said, her hand brushing his shoulder, nails sharp against his skin through his shirt, a jolt racing down his spine. "Adapt, and we all survive." Her scent hit him again, storm and spice, wild and close, and the walls shuddered, closing in an inch, a slick sheen coating them like sweat. The console flared brighter, words scrolling faster, and Jackson felt it, a pull, deep and hungry, from the house, from them, sinking into his bones. His blood raced, fear tangling with a heat he couldn't shove down. He was trapped, caught in something bigger than him, but that spark, the one LYSS said she'd seen across the stars, flickered alive. He wasn't ready to give in, not yet. "Survive," he said, voice low, meeting Vera's eyes, then LYSS's. "I'll do more than that." The walls pulsed again, fast and eager, and LYSS's smile widened, sharp. Jackson Reeve stood in the basement's pulsing blue glow, the console's words, Settler 39, Jackson Reeve. Adaptation in progress, burning into his mind like a brand. His chest heaved, breath short and sharp, as Vera and LYSS loomed closer, their silhouettes sharp against the flickering light. LYSS's hand lingered on his arm, her touch warm and firm, sending a shiver through him even as his stomach twisted with dread. Vera's nails grazed his shoulder, her scent, storm and spice, flooding his senses, and the walls tightened, slick with a sheen that glistened like sweat. "Adapt, and we all survive," Vera had said, her voice cool but heavy, sinking into him. He'd shot back. "I'll do more than that. defiance flaring despite the trap closing around him. The house pulsed faster, eager, and Lysis's smile sharpened, her eyes glinting like she'd won something. But he didn't feel like a winner. Not yet. Back upstairs, the walls sealed shut behind them, swallowing the basement like it had never existed, and the house settled into a quiet hum. Vera and Lyss left him in the living area, their steps fading down the hall, but their presence clung to him. Lyss's teasing warmth, Vera's steady weight, like echoes he couldn't shake. He sank onto a curved chair, its surface molding to him, warm and smooth, and stared at the ceiling, now swirling with faint colors like a slow-moving sky. "Adapt," he muttered, running a hand through his hair, damp with sweat. Adapt to what? Being food. The house didn't answer, but a light flared above him, soft and gold, like it was listening. Days blurred into a strange rhythm after that. The house didn't let him forget what he'd seen. It shifted with every move he made, every thought he had. Morning came with twin suns spilling light through the windows, and Lyss was there, her voice pulling him from the rest membrane's grip. "Up, sleepy," she said, leaning over him, her tunic loose, showing a hint of glowing skin at her collar. Her fingers brushed his chest as she tugged his arm, light but deliberate, and the membrane pulsed under him, warm and eager. "Coffee's waiting, real stuff, not earth trash." He groaned, sitting up, her closeness stirring a heat he tried to ignore, and followed her to the kitchen. She moved like she owned the space, hips swaying as she poured coffee into a cup, steam curling up in lazy spirals. "Taste it," she said, sliding it across the counter, her hand brushing his as she let go. He took it, the bitter richness hitting his tongue like a memory of better times, and she leaned in, her elbow grazing his, her breath warm on his cheek. "Good, right?" she murmured, her voice low, teasing. The counter stretched wider, its edge curling up like it wanted to join them, and he nodded, throat tight. "Better than good," he said, voice rough, and her smile widened, sharp and knowing. Vera joined later, her presence quieter but impossible to miss. She carried a small tablet, its screen glowing with symbols he didn't understand, and sat across from him, her eyes flicking over him like she was reading something deeper. "You need to know the systems," she said, sliding the tablet over. Her fingers brushed his as he took it, sharp nails catching his skin, sending a jolt through him. "This controls water, air, light, everything the house gives you." She leaned closer, pointing at the screen, her arm pressing against his for a moment, firm and warm. The lights dimmed, then flared, and her scent hit him again, wild and electric, stirring him low. "Focus," she said, voice steady but edged, and he tried, though his pulse didn't cooperate. The days stretched on like that, Lyss pulling him into moments of warmth, Vera grounding him with cool precision, the house reacting to it all. Lyss cooked with him, her body brushing his as she reached for strange spices, her hip pressing into his side when she turned, her laughter bright and alive. The kitchen grew, counters lengthening, a new shelf sprouting from the wall. Every time she lingered close, her hand grazing his back or her breath tickling his ear. Vera taught him more, her lessons sharp and focused, but her restraint seemed to fray, her thigh brushing his as they sat, her fingers guiding his over the tablet, lingering longer than needed. The house fed on it, blooming with new corners, a garden outside with flowers that smelled like honey, a small stream winding through the yard, its water glinting under the suns. But the basement haunted him. Every night, he checked that wall, smooth, handle gone, like it was taunting him. He wasn't free. He was a cog, a spark to keep this thing alive. Lyss caught him once, her voice soft behind him. "Still poking, huh?" She stepped close, her chest brushing his back, her hands sliding up his arms, warm and slow. "It's not a cage, Jackson. It's a dance." The wall glowed where she touched him, a soft hum rising, and he turned, her face. "A dance I didn't sign up for," he said, voice low, and she smiled, stepping back. "You'll see." One evening, after days of this push and pull, LYSS grabbed his hand, tugging him outside. "Enough lessons," she said, her grip firm, her thumb tracing his wrist again. "You need to feel this place." She led him to the garden, where the stream had widened into a small pool, steam rising from its surface under the fading light of the twin suns. "Hot spring," she said, grinning, and let go, peeling off her tunic in one smooth motion. Underneath was a thin suit, sheer and clinging, showing every curve of her glowing skin, pink and gold, alive in the dusk. She stepped into the water, sinking in with a sigh, and looked back at him. "Come on, Jackson. It's better with company." He hesitated, his jeans heavy, his shirt sticking to him from the day's heat. The water looked warm, inviting, and her eyes, shifting green now, pulled at him. "Fine," he muttered, tugging off his shirt, the air cool against his skin. He stepped out of his boots, keeping his jeans on, and slid in, the heat wrapping around him like a hand, soothing aches he didn't know he had. LYSS drifted closer, her leg brushing his under the water, soft and deliberate, sending a spark up his spine. "See," she said, her voice low, her hand resting on his arm, fingers tracing slow circles. "This is what it wants, us, together." The water pulsed, faint waves lapping against them, and the house in the distance flared, its walls glowing brighter. Vera appeared at the edge, still in her suit, her tendrils swaying faster. "Pleasure sustains it," she said, her voice steady but her eyes locked on them, intense. More than fear ever could. She didn't join, just watched her shadow stretching long, and Jackson felt it. Their pull, the house's hunger, all tangling together in the steam. He shifted, water sloshing, try clear his head. "So, I just what? Feel good, and it's happy." His voice came out rough, tinged with frustration, but LYSS didn't pull back. She slid closer, her shoulder brushing his, her breath warm on his neck as she leaned in. "Not just happy," she murmured, her hand sliding down his arm, stopping at his wrist, her thumb pressing gently. "Alive. We all stay alive." The water pulsed again, stronger, and he felt it, a hum in his bones, a pull from the house, like it was reaching for him through her touch. Vera stepped closer to the edge, her tendrils swaying, catching the light in faint glints of green. "Fear works too," she said, her voice cool, but edged with something sharper. "But it burns out fast. This," she nodded at the water, at LYSS pressed against him, "lasts longer." Her eyes flicked over him, lingering on his bare chest, the water beating on his skin, and her scent hit him again, wild and electric, stirring him despite the tension in his gut. He looked away, back at LYSS, her face inches from his, her eyes gold now, deep and pulling. "Your ex," she said, her voice soft, teasing. "She didn't know how to keep you warm, did she?" The mention of Clara hit him like a cold splash, cutting through the haze. He tensed, water sloshing as he pulled back slightly. "Clara didn't care about warm," he said, voice low and bitter. "She cared about winning, taking everything and leaving me empty." LYSS's hand stayed on his wrist, steady, and she tilted her head, her hair brushing his shoulder. "Then let us fill you," she said, her tone soft but firm, her fingers tightening just enough to anchor him. The water pulsed again, the house flared, and he felt it. Her warmth, Vera's weight, the house's hunger, all weaving together, tugging at something deep inside him. He didn't answer, just sank lower into the spring, letting the heat soak into his bones. LYSS stayed close, her leg pressed against his, her presence a quiet fire he couldn't ignore. Vera watched, her restraint a wall he could feel cracking, and the night stretched on, the twin suns sinking below the horizon, leaving them in a glow of starlight and steam. When he finally climbed out, water dripping from his jeans, LYSS followed, her suit clinging to her like a second skin, and Vera handed him a cloth, her fingers brushing his as she did, sharp and quick. "Sleep," she said, her voice low. "You'll need it." But sleep didn't come easy. The membrane wrapped around him, warm and smooth, but his mind churned, The basement, the settlers before him, the house feeding on them, on him. He couldn't shake the feeling of being caught, a fly in a web he didn't fully understand. Days turned into a week, then two, and the rhythm deepened. LYSS's teasing closeness, Vera's steady pull, the house growing with every moment they shared. The garden bloomed wilder, flowers spilling over the edges, their honey-sweet scent thick in the air. The stream widened, cutting deeper into the violet grass, and new rooms sprouted inside. Small nooks with soft floors, a balcony overlooking the plain. One afternoon, restless, he wandered beyond the house, following the stream until he found a settlement, a cluster of living structures like his, pulsing faintly under the suns. A bar sat at the edge, rougher than the rest, its walls less polished, more scarred. Inside, the air was cooler, sharp with the tang of something brewing. A four-armed alien behind the counter slid him a glass of amber liquid. Whiskey, real and biting, not synth. New settler, the barkeep asked, his voice a low rumble, gills along his neck fluttering as he spoke. Jackson nodded, sipping, the burn grounding him. Yeah, trying to figure this place out. The barkeep leaned closer, his extra arms polishing glasses as he talked. The houses, they're not what Starlight says, he said, voice dropping. Not parasites, not meant to drain you. They're partners, supposed to grow with you, not eat you. Jackson froze, glass halfway to his lips. Partners? He asked, voice tight. The barkeep nodded, his eyes, four of them, glinting. Starlight twisted them, made them hungry, dependent. Emotions aren't food, they're a bond. Fix that, and you fix everything. He tapped the counter, a sharp click, and went back to his work, leaving Jackson staring into his drink. Back at the house, his mind raced. Partners, not leeches. A bond, not a trap. He found Vera in the kitchen, her tablet glowing, and LYSS lounging on a chair, peeling one of those purple fruits. We need to talk, he said, voice steady but firm. LYSS looked up, juice on her lips, and Vera set the tablet down, her eyes narrowing. The houses, he said, leaning against the counter. They're not supposed to take like this, are they? They're supposed to work with us. LYSS's smile faded, and Vera's tendrils stilled, a rare pause. Who told you that? Vera asked, her voice low, careful. Doesn't matter, Jackson said, crossing his arms. Is it true? LYSS glanced at Vera, then back at him, her eyes shifting to green. It's complicated, she said, standing, stepping closer, her hand brushing his chest as she stopped. They changed it, Starlight did. Made a cycle we can't break. Vera stood too, her presence sharp. Not easily, she said, her hand hovering near his arm, not touching but close. But it's possible. The counter pulsed, the walls flared, and Jackson felt it. A spark, small but real, of something he could fight for. We can fix it, he said, voice rising, meeting their eyes. Make it right, for us, for everyone. LYSS's hand tightened on his chest, her breath catching, and Vera's fingers brushed his arm, sharp and quick. The house hummed, loud and alive, and for the first time, Jackson Reeve stood in the kitchen, the counter pulsing under his hands, its faint glow matching the fire building in his chest. Vera and LYSS faced him, their eyes locked on his. LYSS's shifting green with a spark of excitement, Vera's black pool steady but alive with something new. We can fix it, he'd said, voice ringing with a certainty he hadn't felt since Earth. Make it right, for us, for everyone. LYSS's hand rested on his chest, her fingers pressing into him, warm and firm, her breath catching like she felt the shift too. Vera's fingers brushed his arm, sharp and quick, her tendrils swaying faster, and the house hummed loud around them, walls flaring with light. The barkeep's words echoed in his head. Partners, not leeches. A bond, not a trap. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was a fight. LYSS pulled back first, her smile sharp and eager. You mean it, she said, stepping away, her tunic swaying as she moved to the counter. You really think we can break their cycle? She leaned against it, arms crossed, her hip cocked in a way that made the room feel smaller, warmer. Jackson nodded, meeting her gaze. If what that guy said is true, if the houses were meant to grow with us, not eat us, then yeah, we can turn it around. Vera stayed silent for a moment, her tablet glowing in her hand, then set it down, her voice low but clear. It's not simple, she said, stepping closer, her shadow stretching over him. Starlight rewired them, made them dependent, greedy. But the core is still there, buried deep. We need to reach it. Reach it how? Jackson asked, leaning forward, the counter warm under his elbows. Vera's eyes flicked to LYSS, then back to him. Sync with it, she said, her tone steady but edged with something raw. The house reads you, your emotions, your energy. If we push it the right way, together, we can rewrite what they did. LYSS straightened, her grin widening. A dance, she said, stepping closer again, her hand brushing his shoulder, light but electric. Like I said before, only this time we lead. The walls pulsed, a quick beat, and Jackson felt it. A spark of possibility, small but real, lighting up the dark. They started that night, the twin suns sinking low, casting long shadows through the house. Vera brought the tablet to the living area, its screen glowing with patterns Jackson didn't understand. Lines and waves, pulsing like a heartbeat. This maps the house's systems, she said, sitting cross-legged on the floor, her suit tight against her frame, tendrils swaying as she worked. Energy flows here, emotions feed in there. She pointed, her finger hovering over the screen, and Jackson sat beside her, their knees brushing, a quiet heat sparking where they touched. LYSS flopped down on his other side, her shoulder pressing into his, her warmth sinking in. So we just feel stuff at it? He asked, half a smirk tugging at his lips. Not just feel, Vera said, her voice cool, but her eyes flicking to his sharp and close. Direct it. Shape it. Like this. She tapped the tablet, and a low hum rose from the floor, the walls glowing faintly. Focus, she said, her hand resting on his arm, nails grazing his skin, steadying him. Jackson took a breath, closing his eyes, and thought of something simple, coffee, warm and bitter, the taste of earth he'd found here. The hum grew louder, and LYSS laughed, soft and bright. It's working, she said, her hand sliding to his back, fingers tracing his spine, light but firm. I feel it too. The walls flared gold, a corner stretching out, a new shelf sprouting with a soft creak. They tested it again, pushing harder. LYSS leaned closer, her breath on his ear, her voice low. Think of something stronger, she murmured, her hand pressing into his back, warm and slow. Something alive. Jackson's mind jumped to the spring, the heat of the water, her leg against his, Vera's shadow watching. And the house responded fast, a ripple running through the floor, a window widening with a soft sigh. Vera's grip tightened on his arm, her nails digging in just enough to sting, and her voice dropped husky. Good. Keep it steady. The tablet glowed brighter, patterns shifting, and the garden outside bloomed wilder, flowers spilling over the edges. Days turned into a blur of trial and push. They synced again and again, LYSS laughing as she pressed against him, her hands roaming his shoulders, his chest, her touch a spark that lit the house up. Vera stayed focused, her fingers guiding his over the tablet, her thigh brushing his as they sat, her scent, storm and spice, mixing with the honeyed air. The house grew, not just in size, but in life. Walls smoothed, colors deepened, a balcony sprouted high up, overlooking the violet plains. Every moment they shared fed it, shaped it, and Jackson felt the shift, not just survive, but Starlight living didn't stay quiet. One dusk, as the suns dipped low, a shadow cut through the garden. Sharp, mechanical, wrong against the organic curves of Zelara. Jackson stepped onto the balcony, Vera and LYSS behind him, and saw them. Enforcers in black suits, sleek and faceless, their boots crunching the grass. A voice boomed, smooth and cold. Elliot Voss, his face flickering on a hollow screen above them. Settler Reeve, he said, smile sharp as ever. You're disrupting protocol. Reset imminent. House destabilization in progress. The ground trembled, the walls groaned, and a crack split the garden, dark fluid seeping out like blood. No, Jackson growled, fists clenched, turning to Vera and LYSS. They're breaking it. Vera's tendrils snapped taut, her voice tight. They're forcing a drain, full consumption. LYSS grabbed his hand, her grip hard, her eyes wide. It'll take everything, us too. The house shuddered, walls melting at the edges, and Jackson felt it. A pull, sharp and cold, tugging at him like it wanted to rip him apart. Jackson Reeve gripped the balcony's edge, the warm, living surface pulsing faintly under his hands as he stared at the shadow, slicing through the garden. It wasn't natural, not like the soft curves of Zelara's plains or the breathing rhythm of the house. This was sharp, cold, mechanical, a shuttle black and sleek, landing with a hiss of thrusters that sent the violet grass trembling. Vera stepped up beside him, her tendrils swaying fast, her voice low and tight. "Starlight," she said, her hand brushing his arm, sharp nails grazing his skin, grounding him. LYSS pressed in on his other side, her shoulder warm against his, her breath quick. "They're early," she muttered, her eyes narrowing, shifting to a hard green. The house hummed louder, walls flaring with a restless light, like it felt the threat too. Figures emerged from the shuttle. 5 of them, clad in black suits that shimmered with a faint energy field, their faces hidden behind smooth visors. Leading them was a familiar shape, Elliot Voss, his silver suit catching the dying light of the twin suns, his smile sharp and predatory even from a distance. "Settler Reeve," Voss called, his voice amplified, smooth as oil. "You've been busy, haven't you?" He stepped forward, boots crunching the grass, and the enforcers fanned out, devices in their hands glowing with a sickly red light. "Time for a reset. Can't have you breaking our little system." Jackson's stomach twisted, but his hands tightened on the balcony. "Reset," he shouted back, voice steady despite the heat rising in his chest. "You mean kill us like the others?" Voss laughed, a sound that cut through the air like a blade. "Kill? No, recalibrate. You're valuable, Reeve, but only if you play nice." He raised a hand, and the enforcers aimed their devices at the house, red beams slicing through the dusk, hitting the walls. The house shuddered, a low groan rising from its core, and the balcony trembled under their feet. Vera's grip on his arm tightened, her nails digging in, her voice a hiss. "They're destabilizing it, breaking the sink." LYSS pressed closer, her hands sliding to his back, fingers curling into his shirt, warm and urgent. "It's hurting," she said, her voice shaking, her eyes wide. "I can feel it." The walls dimmed, patches of light fading, and the garden outside wilted, flowers drooping, the stream slowing to a trickle. Jackson felt it too, a pull, sharp and cold, like something vital was being torn away. "No," he growled, turning to Vera. "We gotta stop them now." She nodded, her tendrils stilling for a moment, then flaring out. "The tablet," she said, pulling it from her suit, its screen glowing bright. "We can override them, force the sink deeper." LYSS grabbed his hand, her grip tight, her thumb pressing into his palm. "Together," she said, her voice low but fierce. "Like we practiced." They raced inside, the house shaking around them, walls cracking with faint, wet sounds as the red beams dug in. Vera dropped to the floor in the living area, tablet in hand, her fingers flying over the screen, patterns shifting fast. Jackson knelt beside her, their knees brushing, her scent, storm and spice, sharp in the chaos. LYSS pressed against his back, her chest warm against him, her hands on his shoulders, steadying him. "Focus," Vera said, her voice cutting through the noise, her hand grabbing his, guiding it to the tablet. "Push everything you've got, everything we've built." Her nails scraped his skin, a jolt racing through him, and he closed his eyes, digging deep. He thought of the spring, LYSS's leg against his, the heat of the water, Vera's shadow watching, of the kitchen, her laughter, her touch, of Vera's quiet strength, her closeness cracking through her calm. The hum rose, loud and wild, the tablet flaring under their hands. LYSS leaned in. More, she said, her fingers tightening, pressing into his shoulders. Give it everything. The house groaned, fighting back, and Jackson pushed harder. Not fear, not anger, but something rawer, deeper. The moments with them, LYSS's teasing warmth, Vera's steady pull, the way they'd woven into him, flooded out a wave of heat and light. The walls flared, bright and fierce, sealing cracks with crystalline tendrils that snaked out, fast and alive. The red beams faltered, flickering, and Voss's voice cut through, sharp with panic. Increase output now. But it was too late. The tendrils lashed forward, wrapping the Enforcer's devices, crushing them with wet snaps, then binding their arms, pinning them to the ground. Voss stumbled back, his smile gone, his suit flickering as he raised a hand. Reeve, you don't know what you're... The house cut him off, a pulse of light bursting from its core, slamming into the shuttle. Metal groaned, bending, and the craft lifted off, unsteady, retreating into the sky with Voss still shouting, his words lost in the roar. The Enforcer struggled, but the tendrils held, tightening, and the house settled, its hum softening, walls glowing steady and strong. Jackson opened his eyes, breath ragged, Vera's hand still on his, LYSS's chest pressed into his back. The tablet dimmed, its patterns locked, and the room stilled. It worked, Vera said, her voice soft, a rare crack in her calm, her tendrils brushing his arm, light and warm. LYSS laughed, shaky but real, her hands sliding down his arms, curling around him. We did it, she said, her breath on his neck, her grip tight. You did it. The house pulsed once, a slow, deep beat, and Jackson felt it. Not just alive, but there's a partner waking up. But it didn't stop there. The signal spread, faint at first, a ripple through the ground, then stronger, racing across Zelara Prime. From the balcony, they watched as other houses flared, their walls glowing, crystalline tendrils snaking out, rejecting starlight's chains. Shuttles lifted off in the distance, fleeing, and the planes shimmered with light, a wave of change they'd ignited. LYSS pressed against him, her arm around his waist, her warmth sinking in, and Vera stood close, her shoulder brushing his, her scent sharp and alive. It's evolving, Vera said, her voice low, awed. Beyond what they planned. Jackson looked out, the violet grass glowing under the stars, and felt the weight lift, not gone but shared. We're free, LYSS said, her voice bright, her hand squeezing his, and he nodded, a grin tugging at his lips. Yeah, he said. 6 months had passed since the night Jackson, Reeve, Vera, and LYSS turned the tables on Starlight Living, their house flaring with light as it broke free from the company's chains. Zelara Prime wasn't the same, and neither was he. The violet plains stretched out under the twin suns, glowing brighter now, dotted with houses that shimmered like crystals, their walls smooth and alive, pulsing with a rhythm that wasn't hunger anymore, but harmony. The air carried a sweet, clean scent, flowers, rain, the promise of something new, and Jackson stood on the balcony of their home, hands resting on the railing, its warm surface shifting faintly under his touch. The house wasn't just a place now. It was a partner, a living thing they'd shaped together. He leaned forward, looking out at the settlement in the distance. More settlers arriving every week, humans and Zelarans alike, drawn by the change they'd sparked. The crystalline tendrils that had bound Starlight's Enforcers that night hadn't stopped there. They'd spread, a signal racing through the planet, waking every house from its twisted dependence. Shuttles still came, but not with threats. Now, they brought people looking for a fresh start, a bond instead of trap. Jackson's chest swelled, a quiet pride mixing with the warmth of the suns on his skin. He'd come from Earth's ashes, jobless, broken, alone, and now he stood here, part of something bigger, something he'd fought for. Footsteps sounded behind him, light and quick, and he didn't need to turn to know it was LYSS. Her arms slid around his waist, her chest pressing into his back, warm and soft through her thin tunic, her chin resting on his shoulder. Lost in thought, she said, her voice bright but low, curling around him like a melody. Her fingers traced slow circles on his stomach, light but deliberate, sending a shiver through him. He smiled, leaning into her touch. Just looking, he said, voice rough but warm. Hard to believe this is real sometimes. She laughed, soft and close, her breath tickling his ear. It's real, Jackson. You made it real. Vera joined them, her steps quieter, her presence steady as she leaned against the railing beside him. Her tendrils swayed gently, catching the light in faint glints of green, and her eyes, black and deep, met his with a softness he hadn't seen before. It's more than real, she said, her voice low and smooth, humming through him. It's growing, beyond what they ever planned. Her hand brushed his on the railing, sharp nails grazing his knuckles, a spark racing up his arm. The house pulsed once, a slow beat, and the air thickened, charged with their closeness. Jackson glanced between them, feeling the shift, not just in the planet, but in them, in him. We did this, he said, voice steady, a grin tugging at his lips. Not Starlight, not some system. Us. LYSS tightened her grip, her hands sliding higher, pressing into his chest, her warmth sinking deeper. Us, she echoed, her voice dropping, teasing, her lips brushing his ear. And we're not done yet. Vera's fingers lingered on his hand, her scent, storm and spice, mixing with the honeyed air, and the railing glowed where they touched, a soft light spreading through the house. Days had settled into a rhythm since the rebellion, but it wasn't calm. It was alive, buzzing with a quiet intensity. The house had grown into something new, its walls now crystalline, catching the sun's light in waves of color, its rooms stretching wide with balconies and gardens that spilled over with flowers. Jackson spent mornings exploring it, running his hands over the smooth surfaces, feeling the hum that answered his touch. LYSS was always close, pulling him into the garden to show off new blooms, her hands brushing his arms, her laughter bright as she pressed against him. Vera stayed steady, mapping the house's changes on her tablet, but her restraint cracked more each day, her thigh brushing his as they sat, her eyes lingering longer, her voice softening when she spoke his name. One dusk, the twin suns sank low, painting the sky in streaks of gold and purple, and LYSS grabbed his hand, tugging him outside. Enough staring at walls, she said, her grip firm, her thumb tracing his wrist, sending a jolt through him. You need to feel this. She led him to the garden, where the stream had widened into a deep pool, steam rising from its surface, the water glinting under the fading light. Hot spring's better now, she said, grinning, and let go, peeling off her tunic in one smooth motion. Underneath was a sheer suit, clinging to her glowing skin, pink and gold, alive in the dusk. She stepped in, sinking down with a sigh, and looked back at him, eyes. He hesitated, his shirt sticking to him from the day's heat, his jeans heavy. The water looked warm, calling, and her gaze pulled at him, steady and daring. All right, he muttered, tugging his shirt over his head, the air cool against his skin. He kicked off his boots, keeping his jeans, and slid in, the heat wrapping around him like a glove, easing knots he didn't know he carried. LYSS drifted closer, her leg brushing his under the water, soft and slow, sparking a heat that climbed his spine. Better, right? She said, her voice low, her hand resting on his arm, fingers tracing his skin. The water pulsed faintly, the house in the distance flaring, and he nodded, throat tight. Way better. Vera appeared at the edge, her suit still on, tendrils swaying faster in the steam. It's stronger now, she said, her voice steady but her eyes locked on them, deep and intense. It doesn't need us, it grows with us. She stepped closer, kneeling at the pool's edge, her hand dipping into the water, ripples spreading out. LYSS slid nearer, her shoulder pressing into his, her breath warm on his neck. Feel it, she murmured, her hand sliding up his arm, curling around his shoulder, pulling him in. The water pulsed stronger, waves lapping against them, and Vera's fingers brushed his knee under the surface, sharp and quick, stirring him deeper. They stayed there as night fell, stars blinking into the sky, the steam thickening around them. LYSS's closeness grew bolder, her leg tangling with his, her hands roaming his chest, her touch a quiet fire that lit him up. Vera's restraint frayed, her hand lingering on his knee, sliding higher, her scent sharp in the damp air. The house glowed brighter, its light spilling into the garden, and Jackson felt it. Their pull, the planet's pulse, all weaving into him, building something he couldn't hold back much longer. The steam from the hot spring curled thick around Jackson Reeve, blurring the edges of the night until it was just him, LYSS, and Vera, their shapes sharp against the glowing house in the distance. LYSS pressed closer, her leg tangled with his under the water, her hands roaming his chest, fingers tracing slow, deliberate paths that sent heat racing through him. Her breath was hot on his neck, her voice a low murmur. "Let it go," she whispered, her lips brushing his ear, her grip tightening as she pulled him in. Vera knelt at the pool's edge, her hand sliding from his knee to his thigh, sharp nails grazing his skin through the wet fabric of his jeans, her scent, storm and spice, cutting through the damp air. The water pulsed stronger, waves lapping at his chest, and the house flared, its light spilling over the garden like a tide. Jackson's pulse pounded, a wild rhythm matching the house's hum, and he felt the tension build, not just in him, but in them, in everything around them. LYSS shifted, her chest pressing into his side, her hands sliding lower, curling around his waist, her touch a spark that lit every nerve. Vera leaned closer, her tendrils brushing his shoulder, damp and warm from the steam, her eyes locked on his, black and endless, pulling him deeper. "It's ready," she said, her voice low and husky, cracking through her usual calm. "We're ready." Her hand tightened on his thigh, firm and steady, and the water surged, a wave that rocked them all. He didn't fight it, not this time. The heat, the pull, the way they fit against him, it was too much, too alive. LYSS's laughter faded into a soft gasp as she pressed harder, her body molding to his, her hands gripping his shoulders, anchoring him in the swirl of steam and starlight. Vera slid into the water, her suit clinging to her like a second skin, her tendrils swaying wild as she closed the distance, her chest brushing his arm, her breath mixing with his. The house hummed louder, a deep, resonant song, and the garden glowed, flowers blooming fast, their petals unfurling in bursts of color, the stream swelling with a rush of sound. It wasn't just touch, it was more a fusion that went beyond skin. Jackson felt them. LYSS's fire, Vera's strength, pouring into him, through him, into the house, the planet, the stars above. The water churned, hot and alive, and their closeness blurred into a single pulse, a wave building higher, crashing inward. LYSS's hands slid to his back, nails digging in, her voice a soft cry swallowed by the steam. Vera's grip tightened, her tendrils wrapping his arm, her lips brushing his jaw, sharp and fleeting. The house flared blindingly bright, its walls trembling, crystalline tendrils snaking out, weaving through the air, the ground, the water, a dance of light and shadow that swallowed them whole. And then it broke, a supernova, not of flesh, but of everything they'd become. The water surged, a tide of heat and sound, and the house sang, a high. Their breaths tangled, their pulses synced, and the world dissolved into a shimmer of stars, colliding, bursting, fading into a quiet, trembling glow. It wasn't taking, it was giving a release that fed the house, the planet, not to drain them, but to lift them higher. The tendrils settled, the water stilled, and they sank together, breathless, spent, alive. The night stretched on, the stars sharp above, the house glowing soft and steady. LYSS curled against him, her head on his chest, her hands resting light, her breath slow and warm. Vera leaned into his side, her tendrils brushing his neck, her presence solid, calm again but softer, closer. "It's ours now," LYSS murmured, her voice sleepy but sure, her fingers tracing his skin. "All of it." Vera nodded, her hand finding his, sharp nails grazing his palm. "Ours," she echoed, her voice low, a promise in the dark. The house pulsed once, a gentle beat, and Jackson felt it. Peace, not just in them, but in everything they touched. Weeks later, word came from Earth, shuttles landing in the ruins, carrying crystalline seeds from Zelara, houses sprouting in the ashes. Clara's old towers, once cold and empty, glowed now, alive with the same harmony they'd built here. Jackson sat with Vera and LYSS under the twin suns, a glass of real whiskey in his hand, the garden sprawling wild around them. "Earth was a mess," he said, raising the glass, a grin tugging at his lips. "But it got me here, to you." LYSS leaned in, her lips brushing his knuckles, her eyes gold and warm. Vera smiled, rare and soft, her hand resting on his arm, steady and close. The stars above burned bright, a testament to what they'd done. Human grit, alien heart, a bond that rewrote worlds. The house hummed, warm and alive, wrapping them in its embrace, and Jackson knew